Hello guys, and welcome to another episode of Scale Modeling on my channel. I'm finally back after a minor hiatus, and today I'll be working on Tamiya's Panzer II F/G in 1/35th scale. First, we'll start with an unboxing. This model is from 1971, so don't expect anything crazy, but this kit is pretty good nonetheless. Here we have a few sprues that are in a single plastic bag and hull parts on the side. Now let's take a look at the bottom half of the hull. The details are alright and the suspension parts have been pre-molded, so you don't have to assemble it as well. Inside the lower hull you can see the year when the molding was released, and as I mentioned before, it was originally released in 1971. Now onto the top half of the hull. There are lots of details and some panel lines here, which will come in handy later on when the time for weathering comes. There are lots of details in both the front and the back of the top half of the hull. Now, before we move onto the plastic bag containing the rest of the plastic parts, let's take a look at the rubber tracks. They are classic black rubber tracks that need to be welded together, since you can't glue them together using plastic cement. Now onto the plastic bag. Give me a second to open it, yeah. And here we go. So here's a sprue containing various parts for the turret, like the hatch, gun barrel and some other parts for like headlights, tools and etc. The details on them are nice and they don't have any flash whatsoever. Now onto the next sprue, we can find parts needed to assemble many wheels, some sprocket parts and some pieces needed to make one of the 5 figures included in the set. One figure is of a tank commander, the rest are some infantry figures, which you'll see on the next sprue. Now, here are the rest of the parts for the soldiers, as well as some extras for them like tools and water bottles. The detail on the soldiers is good, although you can see a little seam between a front and a back half of them, so you'll need to sand it down to not see it. And now onto the last sprue. Here are some more bits and pieces for the figures, including helmets, ammo pouches and their weapons. Aside from them, pieces for the figures are included in the kit. That will be it for the sprues in the kit. But aside from them, some polycaps are included, which are going to be used for the wheels later on. And also, here are the decals. There aren't many, but the print is good and you'll have no issues placing them on the model. The only thing that bothers me is that they didn't put all the decals for each of the schemes next to each other, so you'll need to carefully cut around decals to get the ones you actually need. Let's take a look at the instructions. Two sets of them are included in the box, one in Japanese and the other in English. On the front page we can find a short history of Panzer IIs as well as where they are being used and what was the composition of the units in which they served during the North African campaign. Now, on the bottom there is also some information on how German uniforms were painted and what the different symbols on the uniforms meant in the hierarchy of the Wehrmacht. On the back side we find the instructions for the assembly. There are 5 steps in total. The first step is the assembly of the lower hull, as well as some details on the back. The second step is basic instructions on how to assemble all the wheels and sprockets. The third step is about constructing the turret and adding some details as well as optional parts if you are making a G version of it. The fourth step is about adding various details, tools and boxes on the tank. And the last, fifth step is explaining how to assemble the halves of the tank together as well as how to insert the turret into the hull, thus completing the tank. Now let's check the coloring instructions, which serve as instructions for the decals as well. For some reason they are completely in Japanese, there isn't an English version, but luckily I studied a tiny bit of Japanese so I can just figure out the callouts. Now the first one should be painted in German grey, the second one in dark yellow with some red-brown dots, the third one, which was depicted on the box, should be painted in dark yellow, the fourth one also in dark yellow but this time in green dots, and last, fifth one should be painted in German grey. And that's pretty much it. So let's start with the build, finally. Now, as always, first I start the build by soaking the parts in some lukewarm soapy water to remove the grease that was used to release the plastic from the presses, because that grease can cause paint to not properly stick and that can cause some issues later on. Now, after wiping all the water from the parts, let's start with the first step. Also, let me know if you like the new camera angle. I tried changing up things this time. As for the first step of the assembly, you won't have any issues. Everything fits like a glove. Now I'll go, but I'll be back when I finish the first step. Okay, so here's the first step completed. I assembled everything as the instructions said. Here's how it looks. There's still a lot of work needed, but we are slowly but surely getting there. I'm going to leave the exhaust for later because I'll need to paint it a different color from the rest of the hull. Now I'll start working on the second step, assembling all the wheels and sprockets. Here's how it looks. Now, I didn't glue the wheels together, I just slid them into the place, and I'd recommend that you do that as well, because you'll need to paint them in both dark yellow and rubber black, so it will be easier to add on the rubber black if the wheels aren't glued to the tank. Now I'm going to put the smaller wheels inside the hull so I don't lose them, and then I'll move on to the next step, the assembly of the turret. Here's the turret all done. Be sure to don't glue the breech inside the tank, just push it into the slots so the guns can move up and down later on. Now I'm going to do the fourth step and then get the tank ready for painting. And here it is, a fully completed build, the turret, top and bottom parts of the hull, as well as the wheels and exhaust. Now I'll go and airbrush them. These are the paints that I'll be using. Light brown, aka Deck 1942 XF93 from Tamiya, also some flat white XF2 for some light post shading, and some Tamiya flat black XF1 for some pre-shading, which are going to be thinned down using Mr. Hobby's acrylic thinner. Now let's get painting! And here it is, the fully painted Panzer II in dark yellow / light brown. I'll need to paint the smaller details later on. Now let's take care of the gun barrels and then wheels. While painting them, be sure to do it carefully so you don't get black paint all over them. Now let's start brush painting. Here it is, I completed the painting of the build. Now let's add the tracks, spare tracks and glue the whole halves together. As for how to add the tracks, I didn't really listen to Tamiya to mend them together, because they can shrink and not mend properly under the heat, thus only destroying the tracks. So I opted for a good reliable stapler. I stapled the half of the tracks together and then slowly put them on the model. I painted over the staple with some Tamiya rubber black so it doesn't stick out. Then I slit the whole halves in the designated places and glued the spare tracks on the front. And this is it, the kit is now fully painted and assembled. Off camera I put a flat coat on the model, and now let's put the decals on it. Now let's move on to the weathering. I'll be using some black Tamiya panel line accentor and some Tamiya thinner to thin it down, as well as some pastel colors. Now let's go do some weathering. And here it is, the completed Panzer II F/G from Tamiya in 1/35 scale. The assembly went smoothly with no problems, painting as well. The wheels were a tiny bit of a hassle, but they are done as well. Decals are top notch and I had no issues with them. All in all, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. It looks a little brighter on the camera than in real life, but it is what it is. So, what do you guys think? Let me know down in the comments. Now I'll give you some 360-degree footage of the tank in the end. So yeah, that will be it for this one. Be sure to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, take care, bye.